The big rattle in Seattle. A strong earthquake strikes the Pacific Northwest.
It felt like the whole building was rocking, the floors were shaking, the stairwell was coming apart.
The very latest on injuries and damage and why it could have been a whole lot worse. Also tonight, Mardi Gras, marred by violence coast to coast. And where is the economy headed? Your guess may be as good as his.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. The shake, rattle, and roll of a powerful earthquake struck the Pacific Northwest today. The shock waves rocked Seattle for more than 30 seconds, and damage in the Seattle area alone is now estimated in the billions of dollars. The jolt also cracked the Washington State Capitol Dome in Olympia. At its epicenter, southwest of Seattle, the quake measured out at magnitude 6.8. This was the strongest earthquake to hit Washington State in 52 years and was felt fairly substantially as far north as Vancouver, Canada, and down south to Portland, Oregon. Remarkably, so far, no one is reported to have been killed by the quake. CBS News correspondent Sandra Hughes begins our coverage.
Ladies and gentlemen,
lights exploded and crashed to the floor while Microsoft employees scrambled for cover. Bill Gates' presentation in a downtown Seattle hotel came to an abrupt halt as a 6.8 earthquake ripped through downtown. Panic was widespread.
It felt like the whole building was rocking, the floors were shaking, the stairwell was coming apart.
You had to actually hang on to the wall to stay on your feet. That's how it was. It felt like it was coming right up through the floor at me.
Many older brick buildings took a beating. Facades toppled onto cars below. People inside the buildings rushed to the streets for safety.
I was looking at a building across that way and it was just swaying back and forth, so it was pretty scary.
On the 12th floor of the municipal building, reporters waiting for a mayor's news conference raced to the airwaves live.
Undoubtedly you felt it. Just in the matter of seconds, things are still rolling even as we speak right now.
Though the quake struck in midday, not many were injured, and officials were surprised. By comparison, California's Northridge earthquake measured 6.7 and killed 72 people. But this quake was different.
It is 30 miles from everything on the surface of the earth. Northridge was only 12 miles deep, so it was a lot closer to the surface.
Still, almost 20,000 people lost power. The epicenter was 35 miles southwest of Seattle, but the shaking was felt as far away as Montana, Idaho, and Oregon. Described as a long, rolling earthquake, it triggered a fire and mudslides near the water. 30 people were trapped for a time atop the famous Seattle Space Needle. This woman was stuck in an elevator of another building.
I mean, my heart was just racing, and I kept pressing every single button possible to let me, get out.
Other landmarks took a hit. The Capitol Dome in Olympia cracked. The front of Starbucks coffee headquarters crumbled. And miraculously, no one was injured on this highway when it split in half. Seattle's airport, completely closed for a time, is now partially reopened. And while 25 people were injured by the earthquake, some seriously, there is great relief that no one was killed. Dan?
Sandra Hughes. The strongest earthquake ever recorded in the Seattle area was centered in almost the same spot as today's quake. It struck April 13, 1949, between Olympia and Tacoma at the southern end of Puget Sound. This magnitude 7.1 tremor killed 8 people and caused heavy damage, especially to masonry buildings constructed on landfill. Brian Wood of CBS television station affiliate KIRO in Seattle was about to go on the air when today's earthquake struck. I spoke with him a short while ago. Brian, tell me the story. You were where and what happened? What'd you see? What'd you hear? What'd you feel?
We were at the top floor of City Hall, 12 stories up, and we were waiting for a news conference when suddenly I felt a jumping up and down and then that swaying motion that often hits. Soon behind me, I heard plates crashing down and the screams and the shouts of evacuation. Everybody got out, down on the streets where we saw debris all over the place, cars crushed by some of the rocks and the concrete that had fallen.
When you were up there waiting for the mayor to start his press conference, when did you first realize it was an earthquake?
I'd been through several earthquakes before living here in the Seattle area, and I could tell probably within the first 5 seconds or so that this wasn't just some truck hitting the building or something like that. And then as we started to feel that swaying that so often happens, that's when my head started saying either get down or get on the air.
Now, Brian, most people think of Seattle and they think of modern architecture like the Space Needle. Tell us about the effects of the quake in the historic districts with older buildings.
Well, the building I'm standing right in front of, in fact, Starbucks Center, south of downtown, built on fill, old construction. This is where so much came crashing down on the cars below. Also in the Pioneer Square area, the historic area of our city, old buildings built on landfill. Again, that's where we saw quite a bit of damage.
Brian Wood, glad you're safe. Thanks.
Thank you.
Ironically, this earthquake hit on the same day President Bush proposed a federal budget that would save about $25 million by killing a program to help communities prepare for natural disaster. President Bush contends it was ineffective. Seattle was one of the first cities to take advantage of that program. Long-range earthquake planning may be one reason damage and casualties in Seattle today were surprisingly modest. Bill Whitaker reports about that.
It's an earthquake victim's greatest fear, being trapped or killed in a collapsed building. In Seattle, it seems tonight, no one suffered that fate.
I looked out and this whole cornice had collapsed into rubble here. Just absolutely amazing. It was just an act of God that nobody was underneath it.
For an earthquake so strong,
I felt the walls, they were just kind of going back and forth.
Structural damage might have been far worse.
We're lucky it was a deep earthquake. We're lucky that there is unlikely to be felt aftershocks and that we can begin to put things back together again.
When you think of U.S. quakes, California likely comes to mind, but Washington is the second most vulnerable state. Seattle has toughened up its building codes based on lessons learned from California's 6.7 Northridge quake. Scientists even recreated it to study the damage done to a typical house. Since then, the most quake-prone states have beefed up standards to withstand a similar jolt.
We have learned a lot from California earthquakes around the world, and the engineering community has been looking at why buildings failed, why they were damaged, and then modifying the design to allow buildings to absorb more lateral movement.
Which they did at Starbucks headquarters. It may not look like it, but the retrofitting worked.
We did a recent upgrade, about $8 million worth of upgrade to the building seismic, and it seems to have done exactly the way it was designed to do. I mean, it rolled and it rocked, but it didn't break.
But scientists know that earthquake building standards are set to withstand the last big quake. The true test they know is the next one. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Coinciding with today's earthquake in the Northwest is a report suggesting experts may have underestimated the earthquake threat in Southern California. Scientists now say a fault known to run directly under the skyscrapers of downtown Los Angeles is the same type that produced last month's devastating quake in western India. A short time ago, I talked with an expert on earthquakes, the head of the U.S. Earthquake Center at the U.S. Geological Survey in Golden, Colorado, Dr. Waverly Person. How surprised are you at the size of this earthquake?
Well, really and truly, for us seismologists, we are not really that surprised because there's a history of large earthquakes in this area. There was a magnitude 7.3 in the area in 1949. So it's not surprising to us, but for the people in there and other people that think all the earthquakes occur in California, they are surprised, but we are not.
Were there any warning signs?
No, there was no warning sign whatsoever. We had no indication that this earthquake would occur today. We had no foreshocks, so it was just boom and a big magnitude 6.8.
Will there be aftershocks?
There probably will be some aftershocks, probably has been some, but the aftershocks are small. We have seen none here at our center, which means that they are less than magnitude 4. And for the depth of this earthquake being 50 kilometers below the Earth's surface, we really don't expect very many aftershocks.
Any connection between the recent earthquakes in India and El Salvador and this one today?
No, I see no connection whatsoever. And they are completely different systems from this earthquake.
Are other West Coast cities at special risk now because of this?
No, I don't think so. We, at this time, don't expect this earthquake to trigger earthquakes along other areas of the Northwest or even into California. People have been asking that, but we don't expect that.
Waverly Person, Chief U.S. Geological Survey, National Earthquake Information Center, we thank you. When the earthquake struck today just before 11 a.m. Pacific time, Seattle residents were still cleaning up from last night when Mardi Gras celebrations got out of control. Similar violence erupted a continent away in Philadelphia. Police in both cities were caught off guard, but as CBS News correspondent Jim Axelrod reports, they regrouped to take back the streets.
This couldn't have been what Seattle had in mind for a Mardi Gras celebration. A mix of liquor, vandalism, and vicious assaults.
You walk by and you bumped into somebody and all of a sudden they started trying to hit you.
That forced cops to clear crowds with tear gas.
Your conduct is in violation of state and city law.
And left 2 injured partiers near death. And 24 more in jail.
What happened? Please tell me what happened.
In a city where police handling of demonstrations cost a chief his job just a year and a half ago, the cops were damned if they did, damned if they didn't last night.
They waited 2 hours too late. I saw a lot of fights and a lot of bloody people that shouldn't have happened.
Mardi Gras madness was bi-coastal. In Philadelphia, they sent out the horses to try to stop the looting and calm the streets. 100 people were arrested there.
I see some of them drunks, they're falling down, they can hardly walk, and they're vomiting all on the side and everything. They're children, they're kids.
Ironically, the biggest Mardi Gras was also the safest. Arrests were down 13% in New Orleans, where they seemed to know both how to let the good times roll and the proper role for the good times. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the U.S. economy slowing, growing, where is it going? And a train disaster that started out as a car crash. On the CBS Market Watch, the government today revised downward the estimate it had given the public of economic growth at the end of last year. It now says the economy was growing at an annual rate of just over 1%. On Wall Street, stocks closed lower. The market disappointed that Alan Greenspan is not cutting interest rates, at least not right way. The doctor made a house call today, and Anthony Mason reports there was great interest in what he said and didn't say.
The committee will come to order.
Congress prodded the Fed chairman today for any hint that another interest rate cut is imminent.
And I want to assure you that if you ever need to cancel an appearance before this committee to cut interest rates half a point, we'd understand.
Not so fast.
But if Alan Greenspan was amused, he wasn't provoked, and his forecast for the economy was guardedly optimistic.
The exceptional degree of slowing so evident toward the end of last year seemed less evident in January and February.
While consumer confidence has slumped, Greenspan said, shoppers are still spending.
Thank you very much. I think probably the most serious concern at this point is the continuing decline in the stock market, what that's doing to consumer wealth, consumer confidence, and business willingness to invest.
Wall Street, which has been rooting for more rate cuts, reeled from Greenspan's remarks. Tech stocks continued to bleed.
They've become kind of a financial Dracula. They need a new rate cut rumor every day to keep moving, and when they don't get one, they pull back.
The NASDAQ slumped to a 2-year low today. The index, once the symbol of what Greenspan called irrational exuberance, is now down 58% from its all-time high a year ago.
They'd kill for any exuberance at all, rational or not, right about here.
Greenspan warned the slowdown has yet to run its course. WorldCom laid off 5,000 workers today, and former Fed Governor Lyle Gramley says there'll be more layoffs ahead.
I would not be surprised to see the unemployment rate as high as 4 3/4, maybe even 5% by the end of the year. So we've got some bad news yet ahead of us.
That's one reason many analysts still expect the Fed to lower rates again at its March 20th meeting. But any hopes for earlier relief appear to have been dashed by the Fed chairman today.
Dan?
Anthony Mason, thanks. President Bush insists what the economy really needs is his major tax cut. Democrats and some independent economists believe the Bush push is risky business. CBS News White House correspondent John Roberts reports on George Bush on the road and out campaigning again.
With the full weight of the presidency behind him, George Bush left the White House today on an elaborate sales mission. A little direct advertising for his plans to divide up the remarkable surplus.
And there's a fundamental choice. Do we spend it? Or do we remember whose money it is in the first place?
In states where moderate Democrats could decide if his tax cut lives or dies, Mr. Bush implored voters to get on board. And he seemed almost energized by today's bleak forecast from the Federal Reserve.
I'm confident we're going to get a significant tax relief package through. It's going to have enough oomph to it to help the economy.
Congress is almost certain this year to change course on policies that for the last 8 years centered on saving money, preserving Social Security, and retiring the debt. The debate now is over which way to go, Mr. Bush's plan or the Democrats' proposal for smaller, targeted tax cuts. At the Stage Right Cafe in Omaha, where the sarcasm runs as strong as the coffee, they've heard all the talk about tax cuts.
Some people think it's too small, some people think it's too big, and some people think it's just right. Isn't that what it was?
Well, what do you think?
I think it could probably be reduced.
Jan Thill believes if Mr. Bush can hold the line on spending, his tax cut could work. But Sue Kilgarren fears the president is rolling the dice on 8 years of success just for political gain.
I think a big tax cut is just a real feather in someone's cap.
House Republicans appear to have heard Mr. Bush's plea for swift passage of his tax cut, scheduling a vote for next week. Debate might be short, but it will be intense. Dan?
John Roberts. Congress opens more hearings tomorrow investigating President Clinton's last-minute pardons of Mark Rich and others. CBS's Phil Jones reports tonight the former president's attorney, David Kendall, has now shown House committee investigators a list of contributors to the Clinton library. The committee is looking for any indications that the pardons were bought. There's a lot more CBS News ahead, so stay here with us. The CBS Weather Watch map of the U.S. shows wide bands of rain, ice, and snow today all across the southern half of the country. And in northwestern Illinois, a 7-mile-long ice jam has plugged up the Rock River. With nowhere else to go, the backed-up water went sloshing into several small towns. About 200 people had to be evacuated to higher ground. Overseas, at least 13 people were killed and dozens more injured today in a train crash in northern England, a train crash apparently caused by an automobile accident. The battered cars of a passenger express and a freight train were strewn across the tracks and adjacent fields near a highway overpass. Investigators say it all started when a vehicle veered off the highway and crashed onto the tracks. The driver survived, but as he called the police, the passenger train struck the wreckage, derailed, and slammed into the oncoming freight. In Japan, Admiral William Fallon pressed his apology campaign for the sinking of a Japanese fishing trawler by a U.S. Navy submarine. He met families of the 9 men and boys missing and presumed dead. Fallon noted that while U.S. law demands a presumption of innocence, Japanese custom requires an immediate apology.
The message is one of sincere regret that this incident occurred.
And off Spain, 24 crew members from a Maltese cargo ship were rescued by helicopter after the vessel broke in half during a violent storm. 11 others are dead or missing. There is a happy follow-up to report tonight on the story of the baby girl in Canada who survived a sub-zero night outdoors last week wearing nothing but a diaper. 13-month-old Erica Nordby is now out of intensive care and has begun speaking to her mother. Doctors are hopeful she escaped brain damage, even though her body was partly frozen and her heart stopped for 2 hours. We'll give you an update on the earthquake in the Northwest when the CBS Evening News continues in just a moment. Updating tonight's top story and tomorrow's headlines, a powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake very deep below ground has ripped and rippled through the Pacific Northwest. Damage to Seattle, Washington alone is estimated in the billions of dollars. The governor has declared a state of emergency. Dozens of injuries reported, a few critical. Amazingly, so far, no one reported killed. Engineers say it's at least partly because of improved building design based on lessons learned in previous quakes. President Bush said tonight that he's prepared to act quickly to send federal disaster help to the quake zone. That's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
If you use an asthma inhaler, don't miss our report tomorrow. Experience CBS News.